This episode is not sponsored, but we encourage you to help support the small businesses, charities, and organisations that we mention.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Our Circle. I'm Rhiannon.
And I'm Jess.
And today we have a very special guest host with us because we are going to be covering the topic of politics. Dun, dun, dun. Now, I don't want everyone to suddenly click on and be like, nope, don't want to hear a thing. We are going to be as neutral as possible. We are just coming here from a place of wanting to learn, getting to cover all the bases. And we thought we would have our own little expert with us. So please welcome Rich, who is the fiance of our previous Our Circle guest host, James Armion, but he is also a data and infographic applicator and appreciator. He's also an elections, transport, films, Lego and history geek. Please welcome Rich.
Yay!
Hi, Rich. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you. We're so happy to have you because I think Jess and I have been saying this, and we said it to you actually before we started recording. We come from what we feel as a generation that was just never taught politics. We weren't really ever, I don't remember it at school ever. Do you, Jess?
No, if it was taught, it was way too brief. I think all of the education is pretty much whatever your family's stance are, and it's put upon you rather than you thinking for yourself. So I'm really excited about today to learn a bit more.
Definitely. So I guess to start off with, Rich, could you please, if possible, give us a breakdown of UK politics? So how is the government run in the UK? We have like different parties and stuff. We want to sort of get into all of that, the durations of terms. Break it down for us if you can. Take it away.
That's a big task
Yes.
and a very big ask, but I will try my hardest.
Thank you.
We apparently, I say apparently, live in a constitutional democracy. But we don't have a constitution.
Right.
So
Can we break down that word?
This is going to happen. So constitution is basically a written down code of how government is meant to run for that society. So in the States, they have once they broke away from us, Uxbridge, because they didn't want to have a monarchy because we were long reasons anyway. I won't go into that. They wrote down the constitution saying they had to have a president, they had to have a separate judiciary, and they had to have a separate parliament. Which
it's like a rule, basically, like a rule book.
It's like a set rule, which was like this. The French have it as well because they went through very Republican. Germany has got a type. We in the UK we haven't got anything written down because we have always had a monarchy since. And the same with this is where I'm bringing Scotland in. Mm-hmm. Scotland and us, English, Welsh, however you want to say, have had a monarchy since
forever,
basically, over a millennia. Okay, So through that development, people have gained power off the monarchy. Okay, and first of all, that was the rich barons, who are the lords. Second of all, that was rich merchants who have turned into the House of Commons, and we as people have then had the power to elect those MPs in the Commons. Okay?
I had no understanding of that just to start with. Like, I'd never even thought of like the history of why we have House of Commons or anything like that. This makes a lot more sense. Thank you. Continue.
No, it's cool because, as you said, we don't get taught anything at school. When you get history, you get here's the Tudors, here's the Victorians, here's World War II. And you don't get taught politics. Now, I'd say the under 21s will probably have gone through citizenship, which was the aim. But mostly probably people of my age who were born in the 80s and going into the 90s, we wouldn't have had this kind of separate. We had PSHE, but that was very much more about other stuff. It wasn't. It was never about politics. So, but going back to what we were saying, you've got your monarchy, you've got your lords, and you've got your commons. Okay, that's the main structure of the parliament.
Right.
And then we have the judiciary, laws, courts, judges, prisons, stuff, who are technically meant to be separate.
Okay.
but aren't. Because they are run by the government. Okay. But saying that, really easy way to think about it. Okay. The judiciary, those law courts, they are not there to make law. They are there to implement the law. So the government makes the law, politicians make the law, the law courts, the police systems, prisons implement the law.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Is that a very clear difference?
Yes.
We're with you.
Yep, we're here so far.
I think what people go, oh, the politicians have made this law, so and that's the correct. Yes, they have made the law, but they're not the ones who then implement the law. And
Right.
that's the police, the law courts, the prison system. And you have to tear those bits apart, because otherwise you start in this country we have a very mixed system where someone's making one law and someone's making another law, but they're all implemented by the judiciary system. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
That makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that's our structure of government. Okay, is in monarch, lords, MPs. Okay, judiciary on the side who implement, and then you've got us who are the voters and the electors.
Mhm.
Everybody above 18 in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and in Scotland, except for the House of Commons, everyone above 16. Okay. So, and this is where I'm going to go on and get a bit, because there isn't just the House of Commons.
Yeah.
There is a flood of different elected positions in this country.
And actually, just to note for everyone, so we're recording on the 29th of May. So on the 6th of May, we had an election, and this is kind of why I wanted to discuss this, because I've kept my little booklet here just to show anyone who's it. This was for the Mayor of London and London Assembly elections. Jess lives in a different borough technically to us, so she wasn't given one of these. She was given one for her area, and it sort of covers very, very briefly the candidates, but it sort of breaks down how we get involved and what are sort of things to do. So it would explain how the voting works and things like that, which is great. But part of me was sort of like, this needs to be broken down more. I need to understand this a lot more. So this is why we're sort of doing this.
Totally. So this is where we come down to, and this is the nitty gritty, and I'm sorry for your listeners, your viewers, it's going to get very rough, because it depends on where you live, depends on what type of elections you get, and depends on how you've experienced the voting system.
Yes.
So let's start that when I was saying about MPs. The whole four nations of the UK, Northern Ireland, Wales, England, Scotland, send MPs to London to sit in the House of Commons. And the country is broken down into little districts called constituencies.
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And every person has one vote for one candidate in that constituency. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, if you were living in, say, London, there are roughly about 52 constituencies that make up the whole city. Okay. If you are living up in Northern Ireland, there's 18 for the whole of Northern Ireland, but they are all geographically focused on one area. It's called first by the post. So what a candidate has to do is get a simple majority. So they have to literally get more votes than any other person on the candidate list. And people tend to vote on the party lines of so they don't really know who their candidate is. I think unless you've got a famous MP. So, for example, I live in Kingston and Surbiton, so I have Sir Daly, who is the leader of the Lib Dems. And people live in Uxbridge have Boris Johnson, who's the leader of the Conservatives and the Prime Minister. So those are quite famous
names,
senior politicians. But if you live, I don't know, somewhere like Poole West, or I don't think that's even constitutionally Poole, or East Devon, I would really struggle, and I am a very big data nerd, to name your MP, because there are 650 MPs to remember. And even data nerds like me kind of go, oh, are they MP for X region, or are they MP for over there? And it's really, really hard. Mm-hmm. So, Jess, where do you live? Sorry.
Spelthorne.
Spelthorne, right.
Yeah.
Spelthorne is on the east straddles of the London-Surrey borders. I think you have an MP that is for Spelthorne, but I have no idea who that is. And
unfortunately, I can't tell you either.
Exactly. Does that make sense? Yeah? You live in your constituency and you can't name your MP. That's not your fault. That is the fault of the system, because the system doesn't really want you to know who your local MP is. Not because they're trying.
I was thinking, I was like, there's a big strategy thing behind a lot of this that sort of deters a lot of people, whether it's our age, whether it's younger, older. It tries to sort of make them not be interested so that they can sort of almost get away with politics. Me trying to stay neutral here.
It's very difficult, because you you bring in your own experience, which isn't actually bias. It's actually just what you felt. I think you have to go away from bias and, so for example, living in Spelthorne, your MP, Jess, no idea. That's because probably the party, I think it is Conservative in Spelthorne, the whole system behind it is a giant list across the country. They select 650 MPs. Different parties do it in different ways. I won't go into that because you don't have time. but when you get a massive majority like the Conservatives currently do in the House of Commons, you're not going to really remember the amount of MPs there are by name. And unless you have someone like, for example, Caroline Lucas, who's down in Brighton, who is the Green MP, she's one MP, she's a very big figure. She's a very big constituency MP. She's well known. Does that make sense? Yeah?
Yeah.
So people know who she is in her constituency because she makes a big deal of, I'm your MP because I'm the one person from this party who elects,
Right.
You've got a majority. You don't need to do that because you're relying on what I would describe as a hold vote. So if you're not in a swing seat, so there's swing seats in the country which will have a very small majority, which will go between certain parties. So traditionally in Southern England, a lot of Conservative are strong seats where the MP doesn't need to go around knocking on every door.
Right.
They don't need, and this happens in Labour-held northern seats as well, where they don't need to knock on every door because they know people are going to vote for that particular party in that particular area.
So swing seats, not to sort of complicate everything for the listeners right now, but if anyone is familiar with swing states in elections, is it like that then? So it literally has the ability to go whichever way, it can swing whichever way.
So let me give you an example in London. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you have a seat around Wandsworth, which is Battersea. Okay. And that is made up of Wandsworth, Battersea, and parts of Clapham Junction. Mm-hmm. That is a swing seat because it has previously voted Conservative and has now voted Labour. Either way. Does that make sense? It's very small margins.
Yeah.
There is no set pattern. Someone like Jeremy Corbyn or Diane Abbott, who are in East London, have majorities of up to nearly 60%.
Wow, okay.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's quite a lot.
That's quite a lot. They've been so someone like Diane Abbott has been an MP, I think, since like 1984.
Okay.
Wow. Harriet Harman, who is in Camberwell and Peckham, she won a by-election in 1982, and she's been MP from there ever since.
Is that really outdated then? Or is that a good thing?
If you can continue with that level of support for that amount of time, yes, it could be considered a good thing because it's based on maybe a personalised vote.
And I suppose doing the right thing for the people. If people are still supporting you, that's probably for a reason. Like I guess.
I'll give you an example. So in the seat above hers was a Lib Dem called Simon Hughes, who got elected roughly about the same time in 1982, 1983 in a by-election. Mm-hmm. And he held the seat till 2015. But the reason he lost the seat was because the Lib Dems became very unpopular in that time. Okay. So you can see how big figures get established in their seat, blah, blah, blah. But if they do things that their constituents don't like, they can get voted out.
Right, I see.
Okay. So I wouldn't say that every MP is safe and every seat is safe because you said about the elections that just happened and the very reported on Hartlepool by-election where the Labour Party had lost the seat for the first time in 50 years.
Wow.
Okay. And it was a big thing because that's the first time that a Conservative has ever, pretty much in the last half century, ever represented that area. MPs can have massive, massive majorities and not face a rebellion in their own party if they feel that their party and themselves have a big enough mandate to carry on. In places like, as I said, in Spelthorne and Surrey, where there is probably a very strong Conservative majority, MPs don't feel they have to go around the doors knocking, going, hello, I'm here. And it's not just Conservative MPs, Labour MPs in the north, the the Liberal Democrat MPs that used to be around, probably in the West Country, probably had the same thing where they thought, oh, they'll never vote me out. Turned out they did.
That's quite interesting then, because every time that there's elections, at least in the area that I live in, I always get people knocking at our door from all parties, you know, asking who we're going to vote for. I used to get annoyed by it when I was younger, not just because they were knocking at my door. I'd be like, can you go away? TV's on. But like, you know, it was sort of like, you don't need to know. And I think, again, that was sort of based on what Jess was saying earlier, how, you know, your politics is either what your parents sort of taught you when you were younger, or I very much was brought up to sort of not really discuss politics with people, whereas now I feel very different about, like, I mean, God, we're doing a podcast episode on it, but it's because I want that understanding. I want to be able to discuss other sides, you know, with people and understand it, because, you know, it's always better to get the full circle and everything. But yeah, I think that is interesting.
I think some voters don't feel valued because they don't get that link between
that would make sense
between parties coming and saying, hi, can I talk to you about stuff?
100%, yeah. You
know, and I think there is a lack of that kind of, when MPs have strong majorities, they feel they don't need to do it. Now, that's not for me to say what they need to do or not do, but I feel that I, as a voter, would definitely want someone to come and ask me and go, how's your life going? How can I help?
I think for me personally, I would quite like that, not just around an election. I think sometimes it would be nice to have like a little check-in every now and then with your MP, or I don't know if it's just me thinking about, like, I don't know if you're familiar with this show, Rich, but Gilmore Girls, for example, they have
I love them.
Oh my God. Okay, so you know how they have like their town hall meetings and stuff. I'm sure in my town they probably have those, but I'm not aware of them in the way that I would like to be, at least the way that movies and film portray and TV portray it, because then you have that sense of community, you have that sense of understanding, and you feel a bit more, I would say, encouraged to vote and encouraged to feel a part of the politics that are happening in your town, in your city, in your country and everything. I think it is very much, if you're asking people to vote for you, then that means you are trying to represent them. If you're trying to represent them, surely you should be part of them and trying to get their opinion. And I mean, you know, anyone who's listening who thinks otherwise, that's fine, but this is pretty much how
it makes you feel like you're so small and kind of insignificant in it all, that if you have anything to say, it's not going to be heard, because it's they're not within reach. So I mean, that's personally how I would feel.
No, I agree.
Just for your listeners and your viewers' sake, I would say there are avenues definitely to go down. MPs do have what they call constituency surgeries.
Okay.
Where the MP will come down from Parliament, or they're the people they hire in Parliament to sit there and listen to you. And you can go onto the Parliament website, or you can go onto your local MP's website and find out when they are doing that. Out of COVID time, that's quite regular, but I'm sure they've been hopefully the better MPs, I would say, have been doing digital surgeries. But
I see.
You know, so it's a bit like a GP. You can kind of go down and see them and say, I'm having a real hard time with my council tax, or I'm having a really hard time with the NHS, or, you know, and MPs are meant to go back to Westminster, and they're meant to go and communicate with ministers and with government departments and say, hey, what's going on? Why isn't this getting sorted? Blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And there's other avenues. So you can do petitions on the Parliament's website, where you can get other people to kind of go, yeah, this is an issue I really want discussed in Parliament.
Right.
And if you get above like 100,000 votes, it is then discussed in Parliament if it's in the remit.
Yes, I think it's important to stress that is why, at least in the UK, I can't speak for other countries, but my understanding for the UK is that, like, if there's a petition that's going around and people are asking for your vote, it's not just to immediately affect change straight away. It's just for it to even just get noticed.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's to raise the issues, and you can become a campaigner yourself. There is nothing stopping you as an individual from raising campaigns.
Yeah, like if I wanted donuts every Friday, I could make a petition about that.
Totally. And I'm sure that is a petition that people will support.
I need to find that one.
Thoroughly, you know.
So behind that. No, I was going to say that. I was going to say that you see these petitions being shared quite a lot online. So from that point of view, I feel like things are quite accessible, and you can get on board with certain things a lot easier, I guess, nowadays, because we've got this sort of digital, we've got access to things online. So that's great.
And the other thing is that you think about it, and we were talking about structures of government, and this is what we're leading onto this question. Well, you just haven't got an MP. You've got a whole different things in between. So for some people in some parts of the country, and this is where it gets complicated, and I wrote a list, you might have a parish councillor. So you might have a little tiny council in your village or your town, which people go and sit on.
Right.
Okay. But you have the right, as someone living in that thing, to vote for your parish councillor. And the same if you live in a borough, or you live in a district, or you live in a unitary authority. You have a councillor that represents your ward on whatever authority you live under. Now, some people will have a parish, then a district, then a shire council. For some people who live in, say, Somerset, or live in... this is where we get complicated.
Well, I suppose we're quite big on analogies here, and the way that I can sort of try and simplify it for people is almost like your managers. Like, so you have a manager, and you have a line manager, and a whatever. Like,
the line managers keep reporting up to the senior. Totally. So there is different layers of government depending on where you live. So in London, in a borough, you'll have the borough council. Then you'll have the Mayor of London and the Greater London Authority, which is what we voted for a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
Yes. And then you'll have your MP, and then you'll have the government. Okay. So there's different levels that, you have. You, as a constituent, whether you are above 18 or not, and whether you voted for that councillor, that MP, that whoever that person is, you have the right to petition those people directly, and through email, through telephone, through letter, you have the right to say, hey, I want to bring this issue up with you. What are you going to do about it? Or how can you help me? I've done it before, because I've become so annoyed with something very little, or or I'm not so really annoyed with something. God, you know what? The only person I can deal with it is this person who is meant to represent me, and they might not be from the same party. And they might not agree with you. That is a warning.
Well, I think that's actually quite valid to say, because, this time last year, when the Black Lives Matter movement momentum just picked up like crazy, we had different petitions going around, but we also had a lot of people giving us templates of emails to then send to our MPs, and I had no clue who the MP was that I was emailing, but I was like, you're going to hear from me, like, I want you to hear this. So I think it is that, like you said, it's valid to know that.
Sometimes you will hopefully get a response, and this is the problem. If you don't get a response, email back. Keep going. Because you don't, the person who your area has elected, and notice I said your area, not you, because if you did for that person, it can sometimes feel like, well, they're not going to listen to my views.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Remember, they're politicians.
Yeah.
They want your vote.
Yeah.
And they will sway if people make enough of a noise, that MP will sway, or that councillor will sway, or that whoever will sway. Okay. Because they don't want to find next time that they are then elected out of office.
Yes.
And that's the power you have as a voter.
Okay, so let's get into the types of parties that we have in the UK. So could you just give us maybe like a couple of main points that would help our listeners know about each party? So what they stand for maybe, and how they differ, because ultimately I do think that most parties are all of the same understanding, that they're trying to represent people and do the best for most people. I think we can agree on that. It's just there's different ways that they go about it, I think. So Rich, please take it away and explain to us the UK parties.
First of all, very diplomatically put, I'd like to
say.
Second, can I just make a clarification before we start? I'm not including the Northern Irish parties in this. You said UK, but I think if we go down that route, there's a whole swell of difference there. And I'm not, because I'm not either Northern Irish or I'm not expert in Northern Irish politics, I'm going to leave those parties aside. So do your own research if you want to.
No problem.
Okay, so I'm going to focus on England, Scotland, Wales. Okay, so what we call the big three, or some people would say big two, but the big three are the Conservatives, the Labour Party, and the Liberal Democrats. Over the last now 3 centuries, I'm talking the last 3 centuries, at some point, one of these parties has formed the government. Briefly, very briefly, go through the very quick history. And what I mean by history, literally give you a date rather than... So, Conservatives, they were formed out of what was called the Tory party in the early 18th century. The Liberals, not the Liberal Democrats, the Liberals were formed from the Whig party. And they used to be the old dominant parties before we became a full democratic country. So you used to have something called rotten boroughs, where only men of a certain class could vote, and it wasn't a democratic election. If anyone's seen the brilliant Horrible Histories clip of rotten boroughs, if you haven't, I would go and watch it. It's very funny. Okay. Before that, you used to have 2 called the Whigs and the Tories. They evolved into the Liberal and the Conservative parties. And they were dominant in politics throughout the 19th century until the turn of the 20th century. And then you have the Labour Party, who came out of the trade union movement. Trade unions came from the fact that you had a right to appoint a union to look after your kind of well-being in your employment place. And this came out of the Industrial Revolution in the Victorian era, where you used to have bosses basically tell you, you'd be working for this many hours. The socialist movement that came out of that formed the Labour Party in the late 19th century. And then once the vote expanded, especially after World War I, where more women were allowed to vote, and then more men of working class were allowed to vote as well, they overtook the Liberals and became the second dominant party. So when you came to the start of the 20th century, you had this real struggle between, there now becomes 3 major parties. And that struggle is still going on about where we're going. You know, are we a liberal country? Are we socialist or a right country? And then you have the other parties, which I know you want me to talk about. So you have the nationalist parties in Scotland and Wales, so the SNP and Plaid Cymru, whose opinion are that Scotland and Wales should be independent countries from the UK, and what they really mean is from England. And they've got a view of, well, we as Scottish, as Welsh, should have our own independent future because we are not tied into Great Britain. That's what, or the UK. That's there. And then you've got 2 other kind of parties. You've got the Green Party. The Green Party are now split into 3 different parties in Wales, Scotland. 4, sorry. Yeah, that's 3. In Wales, in England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. But they actually used to be 1 party. But they now believe in they don't believe in independence unless they're Scottish. What they believe is actually that each country should decide for themselves whether they want to remain part of the union or they want to go their individual ways. But they believe in ecology. They believe in environmental practices should be at the heart of government decisions. The environmentalism in itself is a political movement as much as socialism, liberalism, and conservatism is. And then you've got UKIP/Brexit Party. They are fundamentally Eurosceptic parties. They believe that the United Kingdom should be an independent nation away from the European continent.
So just to go back over the main big 3 though, so obviously we've said that Green Party is, based on environmental sort of factors. UKIP and anything Brexit related is obviously to go away from Europe. Can we just break down a little bit more, I just wanted to make sure that we're sort of simplifying it a little bit more for our listeners, for anyone who isn't quite understanding the difference between Conservative, Liberal and Labour, please.
Absolutely. So Conservative Party stand for conservatism, conservative values. So it's not that they believe things should hold still and that everything should stay very traditional. It's more that things should change and evolve with consideration and slower movement. Okay. So they stand, well, especially in the 1980s and 1990s, they stand for traditional values. That's less prevalent today. But the conservatism is the idea that one nation, the whole of the United Kingdom, is best together it's best working as a business-oriented capitalist market. Okay?
Right.
So it's about basically the idea that you as an individual should be able to go and work where you would like to work, and you make that terms of agreement with your employers so that your life is then allowed to progress based on your status and your wealth and your opportunities.
Could you argue then that a conservative view is a bit more of like an independent sort of thing? Like it's encouraging you to think about yourself as opposed to...
Yes, I would agree with that. I'd say conservatism is about the individual,
yes,
as well as about a strong state supporting the individual. Now, some people,
that makes sense. So, yeah, I think that makes sense. So, conservatism is a party that believes in the individual. So everyone supporting, the irony of that is quite funny actually. So everyone coming together in that party to support themselves.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, and I'll leave your viewers and your listeners to think how that one rolls out.
We'll definitely leave links and stuff in the description for you to. There's a good one called Simple Politics. We'll add in our description so everyone can do like their own research and whatever if you like. And we're not trying to put anything on. We're just literally trying to break everything down here so we understand it.
Absolutely.
Right, so Labour.
And Labour. So Labour is a socialist party. Now, people go, oh, whoa, socialism, that's linked to communism. Whoa. No,
I was about to say, what does that mean? Like, what does socialism mean? Because I've only ever heard it used by people who are very against it. I'm like, as in a tone like, oh, you're a socialist. I'm like, what?
So socialism is the idea that society is there to look after everybody in that society. And that collectively, and I think that word might trigger people, I'm just warning you, collectively, that people can build their lives better through social action.
So it's better together.
Better together.
Okay.
And that is based on that trade union tradition. Yep.
Right. Okay. So that kind of showcases how Labour and Conservative are
kind of opposite ends of the spectrum.
Right.
And then in between, and bless them, you've got liberalism.
Yes.
Okay. And now liberalism is the middle road of both.
Right.
It is liberalism.
Not right. Middle.
middle. They believe in individual freedoms based on a system which supports the society that you live in.
Right.
So I mean, why it's a bit of both.
So it's almost like they're trying to help each other's parties out by saying, yes, we want to be individual, but we can do that by doing it together.
Liberalism worldwide, and it's not just a UK thing. So, for example, in America, the Democrats are probably more liberals than they are socialists.
Yes.
Okay. So liberalism is the belief that you as an individual should be able to prosper and work, but you should be supported by a system which wants you to be safe, which wants you to be looked after, which wants you to have the best standards of life. And it also comes down to, I'm going to let you live your own life because it is up to you.
Right.
Because so for example, liberalism works on a very basis of going equal rights for all. Yeah. I don't believe that somebody who has a different religion is better than somebody else who has no religion, because that is their life. And as long as they are doing it legally, and as long as it's being done within the realms of the state, which is fine. But also I want a country where we have strong security, because I don't want, and we have strong economic growth. So it is a real difficult line to be a liberal, because
you want a bit of everything.
You want a bit of everything, and then if you go one way, people turn around and go, "Wait a minute, that's very right wing," or you go the other way, and go, "Whoa, what are you doing? That's very socialist."
It's interesting, isn't it, from a liberal point of view, because it's almost like, somewhat you could say, the most rounded in some ways, because they are understanding everyone's point of view. They might not be agreeing with it, but they're sort of seeing, yes, well, this element works and this element works. It's almost like trying to make some perfect circle of world. But other people who are so one way or the other. They can't fathom that. Maybe I don't know, it's in my head. I'm trying to find all the different ways and analogies and stuff that I can think of ways to understand it. And God, I just wish there was a Pixar movie or something to show it, because the way I sort of see it is the way that we've explained it. You've got the people who are like, you know, all together, and then you've got the people like no, me sort of thing, and then you've got the people who's like, oh well, we can do a bit of both. And then I think of like Green Party as over here like, yeah, I see what you're all doing, but hello the world, like, you know, can we like you know? And then the other people over here, and then the other people being like, oh, like I see what you're saying, but like, can we just focus on not being all of this? It's quite funny thinking of all them as characters almost. I think it helps a bit more.
And as an electorate, you can understand why people are confused.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
And that's it's the old Churchill quote of democracy is the best of a worst system. Yeah. So to paraphrase him, you are as an individual wanting to go, I want to find a party that is linking up to my beliefs and my way of wanting to live and what I see is happening in my world. The problem with that idea is that no party is going to tick every single box. And this is why I think in a democracy, some will argue with me about this, it's not always good to have 100% of people voting, because there are people who just can't make a link between parties and they might not want to vote. So in Australia, there is compulsory voting, but there is also a box which says, I do not want any of the above.
I can't imagine what would happen if we had that as an option in the UK, as in if it said I vote for no one. Like it would, I suppose it'd be the same as not turning up to vote, really, wouldn't it?
I think some people would get that would be a majority in some of the
That is true. Understanding all of the political parties for anyone who is either in the UK or not in the UK listening and trying to understand UK government, I do think that there is a lot of resources that are helpful, hopefully this podcast being one of them, but also, you know, different links that we'll include and that you can find. And if you have any actually to share with us, please do comment down below. But I also think it would be nice that this information was broken down as Rich has kindly given to us today. I'm hopeful that this is also happening in schools in a neutral way, so that you are given that basic understanding. Literally, that's all you need with this, because then you're, like you said before, Rich, your life experience then ties into these things. The way that you're living your life will impact which type of party you're interested in. And to be honest, I've said it as well, I think most parties all do have something in common as well, which can be why it's a little bit confusing which party to vote for, because you're like, well, they actually stand for what I like as well, and so do they, and so do they. It's trying to, I guess, which one has the more boxes ticked for you.
Totally. And I think they've done some really good research into where you are in your life. It depends on which party you will vote for.
Yeah.
And where you live in the UK is where you, so for example, in a very prosperous area, so we live in Kingston, you know, Richmond's the same, they're Liberal Democrats, and they're not Labour. Now, the reason that is because people do want that individual choice. They do. They feel that equality is brilliant. Yes, fantastic. But they want to make individual choices as well.
Yeah.
If you look at some boroughs, so for example, and I'm not generalising here, Barking and Dagenham is one of the poorest boroughs in London. And the social deprivation in certain parts of it can become extremely and it's not necessarily the traditional working class deprivation that we're talking about. We're talking about basically people who aren't able to, need to go to food banks and who haven't got secure employment.
Yeah.
There's a real fight at the moment between conservatives and Labour in those sort of areas, because there's a real fight between actually which way do we want to go and live our lives? Do we want a really strong government that will allow us to become, you know, in that conservative view, will allow us to kind of gain the opportunities to get employment and to get wealth and to move our way up the status ladder? Or do we want a collectivism which will look after us? And it's a really hard...
That is hard. That's very hard.
Choice.
I can't imagine what that sort of feeling is, especially if you're living in that area. We're very privileged, we know, to be living in the areas that we are, where that isn't... that isn't the top priority for us at all. And I can understand, and maybe this is something that we probably should move on to, is why people don't vote, and maybe why I mean, there's so many ways and reasons, I think, for why we would want to encourage them. And actually, I might save that to the end if that's all right, because I would like to just quickly cover right now what the most recent election was for an understanding of everyone, how that will affect us, how the public are going to be affected by the election that we just had 2-3 weeks ago.
Okay, and it goes back to what I was saying. It depends on where you live.
Okay.
Okay. So if you're in Wales or Scotland, you basically voted for your new national government.
This was a local election, wasn't it? It wasn't a general.
In London, it was a set of what they call local elections, but that's a bit undermining to Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland.
Okay.
Basically, COVID happened and delayed a load of elections, first of all. And we got what we called in America, they would say a super election, but for us, it was basically Super Thursday, where we had a swing of everybody in Great Britain, not Northern Ireland, everyone in Great Britain had a vote for something.
Okay.
So it might have been your local council, some called your police and crime commissioners, which we don't have in London, but you would have had in Surrey. They oversee your local police force. In London, that's the Mayor of London's job. So in London, we didn't have our borough elections. We had our local assembly election, which basically the Mayor of London, who looks after the transport, the police, some other things like big projects, so Crossrail, airports, that sort of, maybe not airports as more government, but like they flow into and water, that sort of stuff. And then you have
it's a big job.
And then you have assembly members, which are basically people who scrutinise what the Mayor of London does. So they're like MPs, but they don't have any powers to vote anything. They can't create policy, but they scrutinise the Mayor of London in the policy making he or she will make. I know we've not had a female London mayor yet, but hopefully at some point we will, because bless them, there was more female candidates who were on that list. I counted, and maybe there would have been in the past, and hopefully one day we do get a female mayor. So the point being is the way, and go back to that piece of paper that you were showing up, Ree. You got 2 votes. Well, actually, you got 3 votes. You got one for your mayor, and you got a second choice for your mayor. So if a candidate didn't get 50% of the first vote, they'd count up all the party votes and all the candidate votes for everybody except the top 2. Basically, everybody's votes below the top 2 candidates would be recounted for their second preference.
Yeah.
Okay. And for example, so a lot of people who voted Green and voted Liberal in the first box, and this is from the data I've seen, had then voted Sadiq Khan the second box, so that they made sure that their preference for that second candidate happened. Okay.
I think it's quite interesting, that the whole method, isn't it? Because it's like it's very strategic. And I feel like I don't mind sharing this. I don't feel like I'm a very strategic voter, if I'm being honest. If anything, I probably sound like a more conservative voter. I'm not, just to put that out there. But I vote for who I would like, as opposed to who I think would win, which probably isn't very strategic at all.
There is a lot of talk at the moment about election packs and strategic voting, and it's actually traditionally has happened a lot in the past. So there is a lot of strategic underlying voting gone that people don't realise is actually happening every single day. And I've done it. I've gone, actually, I won't tell you what my preferences are, but I voted for a candidate that I've gone, actually, I'd rather have that candidate than maybe the person who's in charge at the moment, because I don't know the person who's in charge at the moment.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe Australia's onto something then by saying, I'd rather not. I don't like any of them.
Possibly. I think we'd probably have a very fairer elections if that was an absolute. I'm not mandating mandatory voting here. I'm just saying that option of, I don't want any of these. Can we have another?
I think because part of me would. I very much understand the people who do not vote, and I know a lot of people really do not understand it, and they get very angry about it. I understand it, but for me personally, coming from a very, very feminist point of view here, like my great grandmother was part of like the movement. I just think of the amount of women. I cannot not think about the suffragettes when any time I vote. I just can't. I cannot like remove it from my brain. I think these women went through so much to be able to give us our opportunity to vote. I always have Mary Poppins in my head of the Sister Suffragette song every time I go to vote. I think of all the women in the world who still do not have that right. So I find it very hard, even though I understand a lot of people's points of views for either not liking the candidates that we have and elsewhere in the world, that they don't like the candidates that are available or up for votes and stuff in elections. I understand that. I can't break that point away. Personally, I can't break the fact that I have a right to vote and I want to use that right.
Yeah, and then it's just like, well, should we be choosing the best out of a bad bunch?
Yeah,
it's just like, it's such a dilemma, isn't it? It's like, we've got this amazing right that we should be exercising, but what if what's put in front of you, you don't agree with any of it?
You're right. It's difficult. I think it is a bit.
And I think it comes down to that point you were saying, just kind of, how do people make that dilemma when they literally are going to that voting booth and going, I have a democratic right to do this, because even as a man, I like to say exactly the same reason I go to vote is because of the suffragette movement. I think we just state that clearly, that just because you're a man, that doesn't mean you're
absolutely.
You have that same impulse in you going, actually, no, wait a moment, women had to fight for this right to vote.
But also, like you said, Rich, historically, not all men did have the right either. It's also a gained right in itself for any type of person you are. The fact that you have it, the only people who, like you said, who have never had to think about this were the people who had extreme wealth. So, you know, I mean, we can very much argue what is extreme wealth today, but
having a title doesn't necessarily mean you're extremely wealthy.
Yes, not at all.
But maybe that's a better thing than what we had.
Yes. I'd argue we've definitely made big improvements, but still room for more. Okay, so with the most recent election, then you're saying it's all for different reasons, I guess, or different areas, different parts. So moving forward, this is sort of how it's affecting your individual area then, maybe not so much as a nation as a whole.
Yeah, because of the nature of those elections and because of the way that different powers and different functions are. Unlike a general election, there is no clear-cut winner or loser.
Yes, I was about to say, so general election is to cover the majority, or that it affects the whole
country. The whole country, yeah. Under the coalition government, there was something that was called the fixed term parliaments, which said that an election had to take place every 5 years. Previously, it was the Prime Minister who went, I would like an election, please. Went to ask Queenie, and Queenie would normally say yes, depending on what was going on. Very rarely would she say no. So there's fixed terms now where we will have a general election. So we had one in 2019, and the next
every 5 years.
Every 5 years. It used to be kind of roughly every 4 years.
Right.
But because of the coalition, both the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives kind of wanted stability, that they would be able to have a full term without one of them triggering a general election. Because pretty much well, I'm not going to walk out the room situation. Between those, we have every 4 years, your local area will have a council or borough or shire or unitary, whatever parish.
Okay.
So that's why we have these kind of mini cycles of elections, and the same with the Scottish, the Welsh parliaments, the Northern Ireland Assembly and the London Assembly. So that's why we've had those ones. Yeah. So
I always get the years mixed up. I always have in my head, I don't know why. I think it's obviously because we also pay attention to so many, some of us pay attention to other political elections taking place, and sometimes it's not even elections, but it's voting for something. There always seems to be voting, whether it's for a TV thing or I don't know, there's always voting happening. So in my head I'm like, right, is it 2 years, is it 4 years, is it 3 years, is it 5? I get so mixed up. So general is 5.
I'll give you a link. The Electoral Commission website, the people who are there, they know when elections are coming up. They will, or there's a little banner on their website which says the next elections. You'll type your postcode in, and it will say the next elections in your web. This and this and this.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, I'll put that. I will check that out, but I'll put that in the description for everyone.
The Electoral Commission is a great website for that, because you know whether you're part of the next election or you're not part of the next election. Does that make sense?
I see. Yeah.
So generals are every 5 years with possible changes coming up, and then locals are every 4 years. assemblies are every 4 years.
So, I mean, this moves on to our last point that we wanted to talk about, which was, and I mean, we've briefly touched on it as well about the importance of voting and or the significance of it, and kind of what we would sort of want to maybe say or understand, or whatever, to those who do not vote or they think that it doesn't matter and stuff. And there is some validity into that, I think, but I wanted to sort of get your opinion on that and your take on everything. So for those who do not feel like voting matters, or they feel like there's no one for them to vote, like what do you feel about it?
So first of all, I'd like to say a lot of people would turn around and say you need to vote. I am not one of those people. I'd just like to say that for now. The reason I say that, and it's because you are an individual and you have the right to choose whether you vote or not. So just to clear that up before we go into that next question, okay? Why is it important to vote? Well, for a start, it's important to vote because you as an individual have a right and you have an aspect of your life that you have control over, okay? We do not live in North Korea. We do not live in, communist China. We live in a democracy that's still alive and is still dependent on us agreeing to how the government govern us. Now, because we don't live in a system where every vote is equal, I can understand why people go, well, I voted last time and it made no difference. And I've been voting for a decade and it makes no difference. I have to understand, because the system you live under is based on the majority. And if you are not in that majority, you feel disheartened. Yeah. And we were talking about this a little bit earlier about when you contact your MP and, I always say when election times come around and people go, oh, we know what's going to happen. There's going to be a majority of this and there's going to be, I go, you know what? At the end of the day, everyone starts at zero. Every candidate on every ballot paper starts at zero. Nobody is guaranteed a vote. Mm-hmm. Your vote could be the difference between someone you want or someone else you don't want getting into that elected position.
Oh, I really like that notion that you've just said there. I feel like that's almost like an IGTV moment here. The fact that every person who is up for being voted for, they are not guaranteed the vote, but you are guaranteed to give your vote. I think that's quite an really important thing. That
you think of it as actually that person who is elected has to win my vote. That person
they need me.
Not I need them.
They need
yeah.
They need you. And I think we are
empowered suddenly.
But you are powerful. You're the electorate.
Yeah.
Everyone, there is only a very limited number of reasons in this country that you don't get their vote. And that is if you're a member of the royal family, if you're in the House of Lords, and if you're a certain type of prisoner, and if you're under the age of 18, or you can't mentally function to be able to vote. Yeah. Those are the only reasons you can't vote. And you think about the millions and millions of people that leaves open who can vote. Now, going back to that reason of why don't people vote, it's because they are disheartened by the system that rejects their votes. And I absolutely understand that.
Yeah, I think we all do. I think we all do.
I think we all get, we have a system, the first past the post government, which means the majority of the people won't actually, and it sounds a bit weird, why a majority of people, their votes won't count. And that sounds so bad and bitter. I'm not advocating saying there's a better system or there's not a better system, because that's not what this is about. But it's about going, well, actually, if you think about it, you have to go and think about your local area and what's best for you, because it is a local vote. It affects the national government, but it's your local MP who's sitting there looking at your local area. You have to go and decide if that person who you're sending to Parliament is worthy of your vote from your local area.
I think that must be quite hard, actually, when you think of it like that, because that is the right way to think of it. What is hard about it is that what we see in the media is a party that we have not elected, or someone that you haven't, that you don't relate to. So I think that can be that is a very well put, and a better way for me to sort of get my head around understanding why people find that difficult to, and I think in some ways for myself, like I can understand maybe how one party might work better for my area, but I don't vote for that party because I want the overall party to be the one that I like. But
yeah, no, totally. And I think that's the hard, when you're getting told by the national media
Yes.
That the prime minister needs your vote because, or whatever. Does that make sense? You end up going, oh, it's not about my local vote. It's not about me. It's about this party who are in Westminster. And, you know, outside London, because remember, a lot of the votes aren't in London. It's outside. They go, well, wait a minute, that's very scary for me because I'm remote from that decision-making capital that's doing X, Y, and Z, you know? And I think I'm not naive. No national politician is ever going to go, oh, by the way, investigate your local your local area, vote accordingly, because they know that if they do that, that they risk a significant amount of votes being lost, because the people will then look at their own area and go, actually, what is best for my area? And we were talking about the difference between a very prosperous area and a very deprived area, and them having to make difficult and different decisions based on their local area's circumstances. I think it matters more in those areas. I'm talking about swing seats again, where they're having a more and it's more interesting for someone like me, where those seats, because that tussle between actually what do we want as a local populace? Do we want a government or do we want ourselves? Blah blah, whatever reason. I implore people who are listening and who are watching this to go, just think about what your circumstances in your vote matters to you in your heart. Don't be swayed by a big, scary national media campaign which goes, oh, we'll do this, do it. Go, actually, what is this person who's standing in my area going to do for me? And I think if we had more people thinking like that, we would have better politics.
I wanted to ask, you know, people try and predict what they think the outcome is going to be. Do you think that's actually quite harmful? Because people might read that and think, well, actually, there's no point me going and voting because, well, look, this person's going to win because they've already predicted that. Do you think it's best to sort of maybe avoid the media around voting time and, like you said, just sort of focus on what's best for you in your area?
There is a balance to be had. So there is a law currently in the country that on election day, you are not allowed to show any polls and you are not allowed to show any political coverage and you're not even as an individual allowed to say how you voted online, really. There a lot of people do, and that's fine. But when for example, a news company says, oh, it's election day, they always run under the thing saying, please don't tell us how you voted in this. Does that make sense? Especially on election day. My personal view of this is I do not believe polls actually help people make decisions. Like you said, it's actually quite dangerous because it's a thing of saying, oh, well, we're testing what the reaction of the politics is, and so that we know what a rough outcome is going to be, and therefore people feel stability for the election process. And I go, well, actually, is that poll or the series of polls that will come out actually persuading people that this is going to be the outcome? So they then are disengaged and go, oh, okay, well, if that party's going to win, then what's the point of me voting? What's the point of me taking part in this process if it's already a done deal? But it's not a done deal because no one's voted yet. I would actually have a thing of saying what you can do is you can say the day before that election is called, this is where the percentage of the vote might be. And then after that election, it's blind.
It's kind of, again, like so many other events of voting and stuff. It's like the bookies' favourites. It's sort of, think of it like that.
Yeah.
Instead of it being like some concrete statistic fact or something, which it's not. Like
not at all.
How can something be a statistic fact that hasn't happened yet? It's not.
Absolutely. And this is why I love election data, not the politics of it, the electoral data of the elections, because that is a real human figure.
Right.
Does
like
that
real time.
That is a real humans voting. That's not someone saying, oh, well, they're going to get this. And that's why when there are electoral upsets, as in people have not voted in the actual presumed winner, it's brilliant because you go, oh, that's democracy. That's what, do you know what I mean? That either that candidate got too arrogant or that party got too arrogant and then didn't do the actual work to get elected, then they get put out of power, which is what democracy is. I think people believe that democracy is about you having your say and that's the end of it. No. It's you having your say and then having your say again and again and again and again and again. And in between those says, you have the right to campaign, to disagree, to argue, to fight, to do whatever you want. Not fight, is it? Please don't. not going back.
Throwing punches.
I'm a peaceful man, but do you know what I mean? You have the right to say what you want and do what you want in terms of going, I want to campaign for this and go here and do this. As long as it's peaceful protest and as long as it's legal, you know, I'm not advocating people.
No, we know. I feel like from this whole conversation here, the biggest part that I'm taking from this, and I hope that our listeners are taking from this, is it is in your hands. It's in your hands to decide your beliefs, your morals, your party, the party that you agree with, and if that changes, also there's no judgment there. That's absolutely fine, because one, like Richard said, it could be to do with the timeline in your life where you are. It could be to do with the position that you're in, whether that's financially, whether geographically, that there's so many factors that all point towards it's up to you. It's your decision, and we're not here to try and tell you who to vote for at all in any type of election here. And again, this is also for anyone who's international here. We say the same thing. You know, it is up to you. If you have your right to vote, we encourage you to choose what you would like to do with that vote, whether you choose to use it and you make an informed decision based on what is happening in your area. Great. And if you decide that it's not your time to vote, we understand, you know. And I think this is such an interesting discussion, and I hope this encourages anyone listening to have open discussions about politics that doesn't have to end in conflict or huge arguments.
Ask questions.
Yes,
absolutely. I think that's what you just said there. Ask questions.
Definitely.
Ask questions of your friends, ask questions of the people who are elected or the people who want to be elected.
Yes.
Do not stick yourself in a box and go, I'm not part of this.
Yes.
Even if you choose after all that you don't want to vote, you've still participated in that process.
Yes.
And if we are to become a better society, we have to understand that you are empowered.
I feel empowered from this. So, I mean, we definitely want to have more discussions like this, and I think this would be great to go into more depth, especially as time goes on, to see what happens post-pandemic and stuff. So thank you so much, Rich, for talking with us so far about all of this, and hopefully we can have you back to talk much more in depth about other things. I'd like to just quickly move on to our last question, which we ask all of our guests, which is, what makes up your circle?
I think my fiance James said this as well. We make up each other's circles, but also I have a really strong set of friends who I will absolutely not live without. And I think the COVID pandemic has really taught me that they are my close circle, as well as my family. I'd like to point out I am loved and I love them.
But you have your chosen family, which are your friends. And
I have my friends, but it's totally, I think during the last pandemic, I've learned so much that how much we need each other as human beings, and they are my circle. And I'm so lucky to have my circle as well. I just like to say that. I think some people in society don't have that. And I think reach out to the people and have a circle, find a circle.
Yes, have a circle. I love that. Yeah. So today's episode, obviously we like to dedicate every episode to an organization, a charity or a small business. And today, of course, with our guest Rich, we've asked him to provide us with one, and that is Amnesty International, which is a cause that I absolutely love. Rich, do you want to just quickly explain to everyone what that is and how they can get involved?
Amnesty International are an organizational group who help prisoners and people who, especially abroad, who are campaigning for their rights. And there are a lot of convictions that happen that aren't, I've democratic or judiciary, depending on that country. And they really, really support people who have horrible existences at the moment. And it's not, I think just clear, it's not political. It's about the rights of people, and I just want to say that.
No, it is. It's literally about human rights. They stand up for human rights in the most incredible ways, in my opinion. I think it's very brave. I think it shows a lot of strength in what they do, and I absolutely love that you've chosen this to dedicate today's episode to. So we'll put in the information in the description as always. We'll make sure to put how to follow them on Instagram. But Rich, you were saying as well, you can make donations. Is that right?
You can certainly make donations, and actually through some, and it's really weird, through some people's pay packages. Actually, your organisation might offer this, that they take a little sub out of your pay packet, and then your company that you work for actually have to give them donations as well, which I've done before, which is really good. And you can select, and that could be for any charity. It doesn't just have to be Amnesty International. So if you've got that option with your employer, go for it, because then a little bit of money goes a long way. I think for them also, just look on their website and see what they campaign about, because I think a lot of it will be what you agree with if you are, if you're a Democrat, if you
just like humans as well,
I know it's so hard to say just be a nice human without being a political statement, but just they do so much good without people realizing how much good they actually do. And if you can support them in any way, please do.
And please remember that also some of this money is also going towards, when we say human rights and people, for example, in prisons or whatever sort of legal thing, it could be paying for their lawyers, it could be paying for just legal help that can help them get out of situations that they should never even been in. So
I agree.
Definitely please support it. Thank you for providing us with that, and thank you so much for chatting with us today. It's been brilliant.
Thank you, Rich. It's been so informative.
I really hope your viewers and your listeners haven't fallen asleep halfway through.
If you've made it this far,
go back and press play again. And no, honestly, I've had the time of my life, and it's so much fun. And of course, if you want me to come back, I of course will do.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for listening. Please make sure to like and subscribe. You can stream us now on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts, and make sure to subscribe to this channel. And thank you so much. We'll see you for our next episode. Bye.
Bye.